I don't think that, people understand. You see the box and you just think, oh, that's quite an engaging box, or but the amount of work that goes into getting that done is a lot.
Hello and welcome to another Firefly Studios video in which we'll be taking you through the making of Stronghold Crusader with lead designer Simon Bradbury and producer Paul Harris. How's it going?
Excellent.
Really excellent.
So let's start with our first question. What drove you into the production of Crusader other than making a sequel to Stronghold?
I mean, I think with Stronghold, we hadn't when we did the first Stronghold, we hadn't really covered everything. We knew we wanted to do skirmish, and Crusader was always down to be the skirmish thing. I really wanted to go to the desert. The desert, if anything, is even more brutal than the brutal Middle Ages, and they're pretty brutal. But also, like, some amazing castles in the desert.
Were there any other settings you had in mind you were kind of playing around with at the time, or was it like, I want to do this because of the structures, because of the setting, because of the sort of gameplay possibilities?
I mean, I think that the Crusades are an amazingly interesting period, and it's like the natural kind of follow-on from Northern European castles, because a lot of fighting went on in Northern European castles, certainly in the UK. Then the Europeans got obviously a bit bored of that and decided to go and cause trouble in the Middle East, right? And there was a lot of fighting that went on at that period there. It's just the natural progression.
Did you see a gap in the sense that there have been sort of RTS games at that point with lots of different settings, but obviously none had done Crusades in sort of a big sort of AAA kind of sense before?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think when we first did Stronghold, we filled that gap. And that was our kind of genius idea, I guess, in the late 90s. And then we kind of went, well, yeah, you're right. No one's really done the kind of Middle East kind of period, which is fascinating historically. Loads of amazing castles, and like I say, really like even worse fighting, even more brutal. I mean, it was horrific. It's a more touchy subject
in hindsight.
But I mean, we just tried to sort of show it as it was. So it's kind of giving a bit of balance, because the Europeans aren't necessarily the good guys in this situation, right? And we wanted to kind of like be a little bit educational. We've always thought Stronghold has got a slight educating role to it, in that even if it's just teaching you, what a Fletcher is, right? But it's had a slight educational side to it. So we quite liked that challenge as well of making it a little bit more well known. Since there's been lots of different games about the Crusades come out.
I just think because we didn't really because the Europeans don't really come out of it looking that great. I think it's slightly suppressed in our history teaching in that classic way.
I just can't think of any other games apart from like maybe Pharaoh that kind of go to that part of the world on the sort of simulation builder management strategy kind of.
On the builder side, no, there's not much really in that area. There's been a few kind of fighty games out there. Crusader Kings, kind of springs to mind, but and then some kind of a couple of actiony ones. But really, it's an underserved period of history, and it's really rich. It's a really rich period of history for us to draw on.
Why do you think Crusader has gone on to be the most popular entry in the series? What is do you think there is a particular reason for this, or a host of reasons?
Go on. Almost.
It's the replayability. It's the skirmish. I know people that play Crusader, and they played it a million times, and they'll set up a new opponents. They'll do loads of variations, and they'll just play it over and over again, and they just love it.
Yeah, it's totally. I think you're right on this one occasion, Paul. But yes, it's replayability. It kind of does a few things. It changes, adds some new units. It keeps the same gameplay, but I think does what we've kind of learnt over the years works well, which is to make a few subtle changes. Like, for example, the Oasis system. I think was brilliant because that limits the buildable land, but it doesn't change anything in the game play. You don't need to learn anything else apart from you can only build on the Oases, which makes a massive difference to the gameplay because you're fighting over this kind of limited fertile land. But it doesn't make you relearn the game. Those are the sort of things that we're always on the lookout for with new Stronghold titles, is how can we keep the same gameplay, but just kind of like put a different kind of angle on it.
I was thinking about like the Oases, the water and the fire. Obviously the fire was added quite late in the development of the original Stronghold.
Yeah.
Did you see sort of potential for that, more potential for that in the Crusader setting? You know, obviously it came, as an idea, it came quite late, so you must have been thinking at the time, oh, what else can we do with this kind of thing?
Yeah. No, definitely. It was like fire was a natural kind of, let's push the fire system a little bit more. And I think even in those days, because we were always pushing the bandwidth of what your average PC could do in terms of the number of units and things like that. And one of the things with the fire system is that when we first put it in, we had to limit it a bit because it just couldn't draw it. Even though all the drawing code was just optimized assembler language, we just had so many kind of like sprites and flames on there that it couldn't handle it. But we kind of optimized it more with Crusader, which meant we got more fire, so that quite often, I mean, one of the most satisfying things is to kind of just get an angle where you can just get into the corner of a castle and then get in there and start burning buildings and just torch it. And that's kind of, I mean, obviously it's it's quite horrific, but at the same time, strangely satisfying.
Yeah. I guess another obvious question in this sort of area is, obviously during the production of the original Stronghold, you weren't entirely sure. You knew you'd hit upon something fairly sort of close towards the end. But by this point, going into Crusader, did you think that we've kind of struck gold with this formula? Did you have like confidence in that at the time?
We definitely had confidence.
As much confidence as a British person can have in anything.
Crusader was kind of, it was an easy win for us. It was also an easy win for Take Two, who published the original Stronghold. They were, they didn't waste any time in kind of going, can we have an expansion? And we were like, okay, let's think about it. But
so they asked for an expansion?
Yes, they asked for it. And we were absolutely going to do it anyway. And it was like, great, okay, so we kind of like, we were completely in alignment with those guys. And we knew we were going to get a really good push from Take Two, which is super important. If you're making a new game, you kind of need branding and you need someone. Those guys kind of pushed it out the door really nicely for us. So yeah, but they gave us the space to kind of think about it and to kind of build the game that needed to be built. But we actually did it quite quick, I think, didn't we? Crusader was.
You churned it in a year, didn't you?
It was about a year, I think. Yeah.
There are lots of great games that have famously short production cycles.
But yeah, I mean,
because you have all the assets, or you have a certain number of assets.
Well, actually, we needed to make quite a few new
I was
assets.
going to say, because I think the great thing is on the surface, it could look like, you can understand sort of where it came from, the expansion idea, but it's amazing how it's, it is accepted as a true sequel, just in a variation, because there's enough variety in there and different things, and I always think, that first time when you send out your torch guy, burn down a building, it's just like, immediately that just feels like kind of different.
Feels naughty but satisfying.
Oh, fantastic. It's great. It's a great Stronghold moment.
Don't try this at home. But there's a lot of graphical work went into it, because obviously all the landscape, and so that was a lot of work, but I guess it was we hadn't got to reimagine it.
No. And
then all the new units, like my favourite. Paul, what's my favourite unit in Crusader?
Oh man, now you put me on the spot.
What subject?
Correct, let's try that again. Paul, what's my favourite unit in Crusader?
Well, you always say the horse archer.
I do, don't I? And that's because they're cool. I mean, the idea is it's just like they can...
Annoying, you mean?
Yeah, only if I'm using them against you. But the horse archer is a brilliant one, and actually that took quite a bit of extra work, because we had to get the artists, because you can actually fire in like 4 directions, so they have to fire, behind, and that's quite a hard animation to ask.
It's a great one, though, isn't it? The shooting behind.
Running away from your enemies while shooting them, nothing more satisfying.
Were there any distinct challenges during production? Did anyone get stuck in lifts? Any kind of hijinks like that, or is there anything on the production / development side which is kind of notable in your mind, aside from having to get it out in a year?
I guess the hard thing, actually, one of the hard things was like just coming up with a list of Arabic kind of potentates. you know, because we had obviously the rat, the snake, the pig, and the wolf. You know, those classics coming across. We needed
That's
to
quite
add
big
in,
boots to fill.
they were exactly, and we decided against doing a kind of like a desert version of, you know, the hyena and all that sort of thing. So we thought, well, because we're going a little bit more realistic with the kind of campaigns. And so Saladin, you know, no problem there. But then it's just like, well, you've got like the Caliph okay, and then it's like the Emir. So just trying to think of kind of like titles for kind of to get enough enough kind of like Arabic enemies in there, and then also
The great thing is that from the obviously the original Stronghold, the characters had really good personalities. And I think that was carried on in Crusader certainly. Everybody likes quoting Crusader, kind of infidels and all sorts.
Yeah, no, we had a load of fun kind of writing a lot of the kind of lines for some of the Arabic characters. I mean, Saladin, you know, he's a bit kind of like a straight guy. You know, he's kind of like noble and blah blah blah. But then you get like the kind of like fruity Emir, and obviously the totally evil Caliph. I mean, that's kind of that's like a fan's favourite, right? The Caliph, he's just like there's nothing good about it. And that's a really nice character to write for.
Yeah, exactly.
And that fitted
really
fitted really well with the kind of the Stronghold 1 humour of like because basically we like our characters to be bad because they're easy to write for, and you know you kind of want to beat them.
Yeah.
You know, it feels bad kind of beating the Emir, right? Every time it's like, oh yeah, but he's such a buffoon.
They need to be a bit larger than life, don't they? That's what gives them the personality, and I think they've certainly got that.
They do have that, and you know, because the Caliph's a hard guy. His castles are hard. They've got those really tall towers, you know, so and he uses tons of pitch.
Well, that's the other thing, isn't it? It was nice because with the Arabic style castles and everything, you know, it's very distinctive, you know, with the tall towers and things like that.
Yeah.
There were some really, you know, nice looking castles in Crusader as well, which are very distinctive.
Yeah, no, we got some really good Crusader. You know, some of them are like super accurate. You know, like a lot of the kind of the ones, in fact, the Chevalier and places like that. They're built off the kind of the actual castles, and but the designs for the kind of the Caliph and the Emir, so they obviously are not. They're just trying to get a unique design for each character and giving them bigger or smaller ones, depending on, you know, what they build or what they've been told to build and things like that.
So who was your favourite character if you had to pick one from Crusader? Your favourite AI in terms of humour rating?
It's going to have to be the Caliph because he is just so bad. I mean, he hasn't got any redeeming features. I mean, I don't know what his mum and dad think of him, but I mean, he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
I mean, Lionheart's good. I mean, I quite like Lionheart as well because he's so full of himself.
He's a good, sort of take the piss out of the British kind of stiff upper lip type.
Yeah, but he also thinks he's going to win everything. He's just so overconfident. And I guess that's kind of, in a way, it's humorous, but it's kind of true to life in a way, right? I mean, he just basically went and spent all the country's money on a massive hunting expedition, and then got caught, and the vets paid more money to get the bugger back. So you know, that comes. I quite like that. I like the box cover there as well because he's got that kind of like that cheesy grin on him. You know. Actually,
I've seen art assets where it took quite a long time over choosing his facial expressions.
This is true.
I've seen a Photoshop file with layers and layers of different mouth, how much he curls his lip.
I don't think that people understand. You see the box and you just think, oh, that's quite an engaging box, or but the amount of work that goes into getting that done is a lot, and the amount of work to get that expression right. Nick's marketing, right? You're getting that expression right. Yeah. We should get a little kind of like GIF or something of the various grins that we have to go through because you kind of go, you get it a little bit wrong, with the eyes and the thing, and he just looks kind of nasty or he looks idiotic. But getting a cheesy grin is really hard.
It's kind of change though for Crusader Extreme, right? You did give him a different expression because he's got the.
He chose a different layer.
Just flip through.
Maybe I don't know. Yeah, it's got that kind of slightly arrogant kind of curl to the side, isn't it? Which I think is sort of slightly gritted teeth.
I always thought we kind of based him slightly on Flashheart in Black Knight.
So on that catapult boulder of an impact, we're going to say that that's all we have time for today, and thanks Simon and Paul for their time describing the making of Stronghold Crusader. Don't forget to tune in next week for another video from Firefly Studios every Thursday at 3 PM, usually, unless there's a slight delay for reasons, and subscribe to us on YouTube for more.